Hello, and welcome to a special Facebook Live after the first few results in the local elections. I'm Dan Bloom, I'm the online political editor for The Mirror, and this is Jason Beattie, who is our associate editor. Now, we've got the strap line is, how are Labour doing in the local elections? And the answer is not that well. Now, there's a long way to go. We've only had just over a dozen results from the English councils overnight, and there's something like 130 more to go. But some of those council results are pretty grim. And that's before we get on to, of course, the Hartlepool by-election. So let's start backwards. The by-election is a kind of exception to the rule. It's the only Westminster election up. But Labour had held that seat since it was created in 1974. They've now lost it to the Tories. A 3,000 majority for Labour has turned into a 7,000 majority for the Conservatives. It really is. I mean, the swing is incredible. It really is completely fallen to them. There was quite a lot of speculation that the Tories would take it because the Brexit Party did well there last time, but they really have completely demolished Labour in that. And now we come to the local councils in England. Of the ones that have declared, Labour are doing very badly in quite a few different races. So just to take a couple of examples, Dudley, key West Midlands seat, we've got the West Midlands mayor declaring tomorrow. Labour had wanted to take that mayoralty. They might have wanted to take Dudley Council, where they were neck and neck with the Tories. Instead, I think Labour have lost a dozen seats and the Tories have gained a dozen from them. So Conservatives now have nearly double the number of seats that Labour do. It's the same sort of story repeated in places like Nuneaton and Bedworth, which the Tories have got from no overall control. They've gained 11 seats there, and Labour have lost a very large number. And ditto Harlow in Essex. That was Labour controlled until yesterday. Now it's Tory controlled. 7 seats changed hands there. So it's not just a sort of red wall thing or a Midlands thing. You've got these different pockets of what might have been considered Labour territory in the past. Being kind of falling down to the Tories. Now, there's a long way to go, but Jason, what do you think of what we've seen so far?
Well, as you say, Dan, it's been a pretty bad night for Labour so far. The first thing to point out, is there was a lot of elections going on, and a lot of the results don't declare till tomorrow. So we've got elections in Scotland, in Wales, and then we've got the mayoral elections, the Greater Manchester mayoral elections, the London mayoral elections with Sadiq Khan for Labour, and ones in Bristol, Liverpool, etc. So the problem for Keir Starmer in terms of the narrative today is it's all going to be about Hartlepool. And the results where Labour is expected to do well, for example, Sadiq's pretty comfortable to win in London. Andy Burnham's sure of winning back again in Greater Manchester in the mayoral race there. Those don't come till tomorrow evening. So it's looking gloomy across the pitch at the moment. Having said that, there are serious questions for Labour about why it's held headway against a party which has been in government for 11 years. Normally, after a long spell in power, parties start to get tired, voters start to get bored of them, and they start to look for change. This time around, it hasn't happened. And that is
we're going to take some of the readers' questions here. And Larry says, all I hear from the Tories is that Labour have finished. What's next? What do Labour need to do to regain their popularity? Now, that's the big question out this morning. You've got kind of sources close to the leadership essentially briefing that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour took Labour to a historic defeat in 2019, and that the transformation from that is not yet complete, and we need to go harder and faster to come out of that. Now, what the people on the left of the party say is that the Corbynistas, but perhaps a little beyond that, is that Keir Starmer hasn't produced enough policies or enough vision. He's several years out from a general election, and he's been caught in a pandemic, and he's been sort of playing it slow on the new policies, dramatic new ideas kind of front, is what they argue. So John McDonnell was out this morning saying that Labour activists were sent out into that election without enough policy and that sort of thing. So on the one hand, you've got it looks like Keir Starmer is pulling away from the Corbyn project further and faster. And on the other hand, you've got the left trying to persuade him to kind of reel it back in towards there. So, Jason, what do you think of the split? And is it that simple? Am I
I think that, you know, the number of challenges Labour faces is lengthy, and some of them are a long way from being resolved. Let's take first off the policy question. I think this is a very fair point. Keir Starmer has proved very effective at holding the government to account. What he hasn't yet done is explain or deliver a story about how he will make people's lives better. And until we get this kind of set of Labour policies, this is going to be very difficult for activists to sell on the doorstep. They need to tell people, you know, why it's in their interest to vote Labour. Criticising the opposition is only half of the battle. Now, the couple of problems here for Labour is, one is, yes, they are doing a lot of policy development. It's not quite there yet, and one of the reasons they do is if you kind of deliver all your policies now, 3 years out from the next general election, if they're any good, that the Tories will steal them. If they're not very good, you get rubbish to them. So you can see the caution, but they do need something. Even it's not kind of concrete, baked-in policies. They need some message, some sort of explanation of where they're taking the party, and that's absent. So that's one issue. But the next one is coming down to Keir Starmer's style of leadership. As I said, he's very good at the prosecution. He's a former lawyer. That's what he does best. And, you know, he frequently gets the better of Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's questions. How many people watch that and how much that affects how people vote is a different question. People like you and me, Dan, who are Westminster obsessives, we obviously lap up every word. But that takes time to filter through to the public. So that's a problem. But the big question about Keir Starmer is he's competent, he's bright, but does he inspire? And if he doesn't inspire, does he have enough people around him in the shadow cabinet who do inspire? And I think those are questions that Labour needs to start talking about.
Well, perhaps that's why you're getting some speculation today that we're going to have a shadow cabinet reshuffle in the coming weeks. I guess it's the same problem, isn't it, that sometimes Conservatives themselves are slightly bowled over by how often Boris Johnson wins elections. You know, he won the mayoralty in London twice. He won the general election far better than people were expecting in 2019. It sort of shows that there's more to winning elections than being right. Keir Starmer is often right at PMQs, but does he, you know, put across the message that people want to hear? I guess is the problem.
I mean, I should say in Labour's mitigation, these elections have fallen at a very kind of unfortunate time for the opposition. They're taking place as we come out of COVID, and the message of change, which is what Labour needs to put across as an opposition, is not chiming as well as it could, because people want, at this moment, at this kind of COVID era, they want kind of conformity and the comfort of continuity. So it's a very difficult time to get a message across. And I think that's what we're seeing reflected in the results, because what's happening is the incumbents seem to be doing particularly well. So whether it's the Boris Johnson in Westminster, or, as I mentioned before, Sadiq Khan in London, or Nicola Sturgeon, who's favourite to win with the SNP in Scotland, and to an extent, you know, Wales looks good for Labour as well, though but slightly narrower than I'd want. The incumbents are winning, and that points to the fact that, you know, this is not the moment necessary for time for a change. On top of that, although Boris Johnson is responsible for, or has been in charge when there's been £150,000 deaths from COVID, the public seem to be quite forgiving of this. And they're not only are they forgiving of this, they're very kind of grateful for the vaccine bounce, and they're very grateful for the furlough. I mean, you heard people in Hartlepool saying, why, you know, they're voting Tories for the first time, and they're going, well, yeah, they supported me during COVID. and that's quite difficult to turn around. Now, the two things Labour will take away from that are yes, it was awkward, but two, this vaccine bounce will not last forever. So, there is, and the problems which have been kind of overlooked by COVID, the lack of investment in education, for example, and skills and training, the fact that we haven't got a social care system of any form whatsoever, the fact that investment is, after kind of years of austerity, is still very low in essential services. At some point, the Tories are going to have to answer for those. The problem is they're not answering now because it came at the wrong time. But, in a year's time, those issues will be much more relevant.
So to the questions, Joe Bridges, I can actually answer this one. Portsmouth are only counting tomorrow, which kind of shows the dilemma that we're in, like we said at the beginning, that we are coming to these conclusions as best we can on the basis of 16 councils, and there's sort of 130 to go. Ditto the whole of the Scottish Parliament, the whole of the Welsh Parliament, the rest of it. So the other problem that Keir Starmer faces, I guess, is that the narrative, it might change over the next few days, but even if it does change, it will be set based on headlines, and council results are very complicated. You've got local battles, you've got local factors, and there will be a lot more going on than just the overall trend. But that said, the trend so far is only from a few councils, Labour losing more than 50 of their seats and the Tories gaining more than 50 of them, so it's not a good sign. Do you think Keir Starmer's socialist purge has caused this disaster for Labour, says Stephen Marsh? I'm going to pass that one to you, Jason.
That's a very, very good question, Stephen. I'm not sure I entirely agree there's been a complete purge. I understand where you're coming from, but yes, the very few of the Corbynites are left in the shadow cabinet for one reason or another. This is the question which Labour is wrestling with. It tried under Jeremy Corbyn from winning power with a kind of very left-wing agenda, for good or bad. At least it was true to what Corbyn believed in, and they got nowhere. They're now under Starmer, they're attacking much more to the centre, and that doesn't seem to be working so far either. So this is the difficult bit. On what platform does Labour stand, which has appeal to voters across the country, not just in Labour's kind of new heartlands of university towns and the inner cities. So I don't know precisely what they do about this, because, as I say, neither policy seems to be working at the moment.
On the one hand, you've got the people who say that, what Labour needs is for more Tory voters to vote Labour, and you're not going to do that by presenting a socialist agenda. On the other hand, what you've got is a problem where not all of our political issues can be boiled down into left and right anymore. Perhaps they couldn't anyway in the first place. But, you've got a Tory party spending or borrowing hundreds of billions of pounds to deal with COVID, expansion of the state in a way that we've never seen, just because the circumstances demanded it, from a lot of Tories who actually ideologically aren't really into that sort of thing at all. Labour faces a much tougher job in any case to battle with that, because there aren't those clear divides between the kind of Tory policy and perhaps a more left-wing Labour policy, because, as you heard from Keir Starmer, he has said not everything, not the cronyism, not the rest of it, but he would have done a lot of the things the same as the government, because the government was following the advice of its experts. Val Davies asks, how did Swansea get on? Again, Val, I'm very sorry, but Welsh Assembly is only declaring, Welsh Parliament, I should say, is only declaring today, so we should find out Swansea this evening. Now, keep your questions coming. I think we're going to go to about 20 minutes, so about 5 minutes more. Of the races coming up, Jason, what do you think are the ones we need to watch out for the most? Because we've got West Midlands.
The most important result actually will be in Scotland by far. I mean, if Nicola Sturgeon gets the overall majority she's seeking, she will then say she has a mandate to hold a second referendum. And this could eventually lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom. This is by far the biggest headache Boris Johnson will face. I think any triumphalism today should be tempered by the Prime Minister. It's not certain that the SNP will get that result, but they're looking confident. And then there's a big question of the timing of the second referendum and whether they can do it legally or not. The government is very much against it, says they don't want to grant one. They're using COVID as the excuse for refusing to grant one. But the SNP could press ahead with it anyway, and say, look, why hold us back? It's going to be tough for them if they do it. The polls until recently there was a run of polls saying that there was a kind of a narrow but clear majority in favour of independence. That's changed for the last 2 or 3 months. So again, I think it may be to do with a vaccine has kind of helped show some of the benefits of being in the United Kingdom. But you could see why the SNP feel that there is all to play for here. And actually, the better Boris Johnson does in the English local elections, the more it could encourage the SNP to push for independence. Because they say, look, this is not how can we share an island with England when it's so different culturally and politically to us?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon, I think, has said that she would push for it in the next Parliament, wouldn't she? So
I think they're talking about within 2.5 years. I remember rightly, Danny. I do correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you may be right there. And it's one of these butterfly effect things, isn't it? When David Cameron promised a referendum on Europe to appease his backbenchers, which perhaps he could have got away with not promising, and then that sort of led to one thing. The difference here is that Nicola Sturgeon is actively and aggressively driving for it. So if she gets any chance to hold that second referendum, then she will.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. And coming back to Labour, I think the other issue they've got to deal with, which you touched on earlier a little bit, is that the kind of the change in how people are voting, but this kind of idea that people vote traditionally according to their class and because of through economics is being kind of superseded by a much more kind of cultural kind of an emotional way of voting. And this stems a lot from the Brexit referendum. So what would really worry Labour is in Hartlepool, but one of the reasons the Tories did so well was a large Brexit party vote there, which seemed to have gone almost entirely over to Conservatives. That exists in other seats in the north. For example, Ed Miliband's seat of Doncaster, that's got a large Brexit vote. Yvette Cooper's seat in Normanton, Yorkshire, that's also got it. This would start to kind of cause jitters in the party, because you come to a general election and this Brexit party vote there is there for the taking. It seems to be going Tory at the moment, and they really do. Labour really needs to find a way of not just winning back former Labour voters, but making sure that the floating vote there comes back to them in some way.
You can see it in places like Sunderland. I think there have been some chatter about Labour potentially losing the council there at Sunderland. That didn't happen overnight, but Labour did lose a whole handful of seats. And that's the kind of pattern. It's not just about the headline results. It's about what happens when that support is chipped away at over time and then sort of collapses in a big bang moment when you get to the one election or the one thing that pushes a lot of places over the edge. And that's why there was so much talk about the red wall, wasn't there? Because you had kind of years of problems perhaps there, and then it tipped over.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should see Hartlepool in that light. This is not a one-off. This is a continuation of a kind of 2-decade problem for Labour. That the traditional sort of base is in the former industrial heartlands. It's kind of being whittled away, but they're not replacing it with votes elsewhere. All they're doing is piling up votes in the major cities. Now that's fine. It looks good in terms of sheer number of votes, but you've got vast majorities in the inner cities, but you need to spread that much more evenly across the country if you're going to win. And somehow Labour needs to find a way of breaking out from these big kind of urban bastions and back into the towns and former industrial areas.
Well, on that happy note, I think we're wrapping this one up for today, because we've got to go back and cover the other 4,000 results or what have you. But there's a lot of questions for Labour and a lot of
plug for the excellent live blog on our website being run by Dan at the moment, by the way. If you want all the results and the analysis, it's all there. Yeah,
well, it hasn't been run for the last 20 minutes by me. I can tell you that. But go to mirror.co.uk/politics, and we've got live blog, results in full, all sorts of analysis from fine brains, such as Jason, and Kevin Maguire should be coming later. So stay tuned, and good luck for the next 3 days if you're following the results. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Dan.